Ladies and gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining today's web conference 504 Connect call. Please note that all participant lines will be muted until the Q&A portion of the call. We'll provide you with instructions on how to ask a verbal question at that time. You are welcome to submit written questions during the presentation, and these will be addressed during Q&A. To submit a written question, use the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Choose All Panelists from the Send To drop-down menu. If you require technical assistance, send a note to the event producer or call our help desk at 888-796-6118. With that, I'll turn the call over to Bill Manja, Associate Administrator of the Office of Capital Access. Bill, please go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate that, and we've had a little while since I was on a call, and we had the lapse in appropriations from just before the holidays through January 27th. And I want to thank you all for your patience during that period. As you know, we did everything we could here at SBA to help make as many loans in the 504 program as possible. As you know, all loans that had been submitted and approved and obligated prior to the lapse in appropriation, so that was prior to December 22nd, we were able to move those through and get those funded. We did add on a little time again so that the as many loans could get into the queue for debenture funding as possible. So we did postpone that date by a little bit, and we want to thank our colleagues, our agents for that as well. But we were able to accommodate quite a few loans during that period. I do want to just announce that since the government reopened on January 28th, the agency has processed almost 900 504 loans for a total of $671 million. So that really is a tremendous, and we're going to talk a little bit about then, since the lapse appropriations, we also published the new SOP 5010-5K, which I know you're all going to want to hear about. And so we have Diana Seaborn and Linda Riley, who are going to talk a lot about the new SOP. That was published, but does not go into effect until April 1st. So I just want to make sure you all realize that you are still to operate under the J version until April 1st, and at April 1st we will convert over to K. Further on this year, just to give you a heads up, we are realigning and reorganizing the SOP that governs our loan programs, and we are going to be leaving the 5 series, just like a car. We're going to be going to SOP 5010-6. We're going to the 6 series, and that is to represent the transition from the way it's laid out now to the way it's going to be newly organized. I don't expect major changes to the policies or the procedures that are there, but really it's going to be the way it's realigned. We're trying to make it much more user-friendly, much more intuitive, and we want it to flow much more easily for our users. And so that'll be coming out sometime at the end of calendar year 2019. So the K will exist for, I'm saying, approximately 9 months at this point, but we shall see. So let's get into some of the year-to-date activity. On the next slide, you can see that while we had a slight dip in 2018, that has been reversed in calendar year 19. A lot of that is because of greater usage of 5-year debenture. There's been a transition over to that, and certainly that is something that a lot of our small businesses are appreciating, the extra 6 months in which to pay back those loans at a fixed interest rate. And certainly with the continued increases in interest rates, we see more people gravitating towards the 504 program so that they can lock in those rates for a longer period of time. So you can see we're not quite where we were in 2017, but we are at this point of the year ahead of where we were in 2016. So these are very promising, and I think that now that we've gotten beyond the lapse in appropriation and that hiatus, this number should come back very strongly as it is right now through the remainder of the year. And I think we will do very well by the end of the fiscal year. Next page, I just wanted to show you 504 franchise year-to-date activity. So again, also in 2019, we are ahead of where we were at this point in the year. Last year in 2018, we're still not up at the 17 level, but we have folks from OGC, Philip from OGC here to speak about the franchise policy, and certainly we've been seeing a lot more activity in the franchise arena. And in fact, we're seeing actually a lot more franchises going to women on their own. That's not something that we've seen in the past. We saw couples and men certainly getting franchises, but this year we've seen an increase in women coming in for franchise funding, which is a very good positive step. You see at the bottom there we have an 85% increase in eligible brands. We are well as in excess of 3,500. In fact, we're down to up to 3,766 brands that are currently listed on the franchise directory that we are maintaining on our website for everybody to see. And so that is over 2,000 brands that have been added since October of 2017 when the new policy came out. So that is a tremendous amount of new eligible franchises that our legal office has made eligible for financing. And so I think, again, Philip will talk about that in a little bit. But I guess that is all that I'm going to talk about, and then we're now going to go to OPSM and Steve Kacharski.
Thank you, Bill. So I'll just very quickly, thanks for setting this up, Linda, Ginger, and giving us a quick opportunity just to fill folks in what we're up to. I know we just did a round of training, and Sherry was out there at the board meeting and was able to work with a lot of folks. So we have two primary projects going on. One is we have a corporate governance pilot that we've been working with about a handful of CDCs, kicking the tires on that. As you recall, at our last couple annual meetings, that was really elevated as a primary kind of automation concern and desire from the industry. So we're working through that pilot a little bit. Really appreciate everyone's help with it. I would say in another month or so, we'll be able to expand the folks that are included in the corporate governance pilot as we work through some of the kinks, so we're excited about the progress with that. The other piece that Sherry talked quite a bit about at the board meeting was what we're trying to attempt the very initial stages of automating 504 closing. So really the stage we're at now is just really working on the upload capability in terms of giving CDCs and all the various stakeholders a reasonable expectation on what forms are required for each transaction. And that might seem like a very simple piece, but what we're trying to do is get a real good solid documentation piece together so that we could code kind of a gatekeeper function that would enable folks to, as they're uploading the documents, know that they're uploading the right documents for each 504 transaction. So we're working through the validation criteria with general counsel and policy and OCRM and others. It's really kind of, if you think about digitizing the Form 2286 and working through the pieces of the puzzle and what would be the expectations there. And then also just, we have some, what I would consider maintenance on CDC online, some of the other things we're doing with ACH, and then our Form 159 collection on the E-Trans side. So all those things are updates and things that we've included in terms of enhancements lately. So just wanted to give you a quick set of highlights on what we're up to. Sherry McConville has been leading the charge on many of those projects, so she can help with questions if there's any follow-up afterwards. Okay, thank you.
All right, we have Paul Kerwin standing in for Susan Strike, right?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. This is Paul, and I'm just giving you a couple bullet updates. One is we do about 50 SMART reviews a year out of the 217 CDCs. We go out and visit about half of those and then do desk reviews of the others. But we touch all the CDCs, through doing the annual report reviews, and as part of that, we test a small sample of the jobs that are created and retained as part of the application. So we just started sending out emails to all the CDCs this week. We'll do that for the next few weeks, so we'll be getting those shortly from our office. And just an update on the impact of the furlough. The furlough hit in a slower part of our review time, late December, early January. So we had to reschedule 3 reviews. One's already been completed, and we've got 2 more that are going to occur in the next month or 2. We had 8 CDCs that had ALP authority that was expiring during January and February, and for those we just provided short-term extensions until we can complete our review work. That's it. Thanks.
So Ian, is your line unmuted?
Yes, I'm here. Good afternoon. Well, thank you very much for all of your participation today. I think we have a lot of good topics here to cover. First of all, I'd like to thank all of our partner CDCs for their understanding, patience, and support, especially during the post-furlough period, allowing us to get back to our normal processing within a very short amount of time. As you know, right after the furlough, we expected to be inundated with new applications and expedited requests. But thanks to the cooperation and being considerate from our CDCs, the amount of expedited requests was very reasonable, and we were able to process them expeditiously. The other good news I would like to share today is that the first pass yield of the center has increased significantly during the first 6 months of the year. The first pass yield is the percentage of applications that result in decisions without being screened out. And as you might be aware of, first pass yield was consistently stubborn for many years. But during the first 6 months of this year, we are able to increase that to almost 60%, 59.8% to be exact. So that's a very good milestone that we're proud of. And there are many contributing factors to that milestone. Our commitment to improve customer service by enhancing communication with the CDC and with the cooperation by providing more complete packages from CDC paying dividends. And SCOPC will continue to work with our partner CDCs to maintain that milestone and hopefully make it even better. Thank you again, and we'll meet again in the few slides.
Thank you, Ian. That's great news. Fewer screen outs. That's incredible. Obviously, that shows in the turn times on these things. That's exciting. Even if I was the only one clapping, it was exciting. little favors are big deals to us. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for getting on the call, both the CDCs that we have the pleasure of doing business with and all of the third-party lenders that have taken time out to get on the call. We're probably into our 3rd or 4th call now where we're including third-party lenders. You're very important to us. So it's good to be able to speak with both our CDCs and to you together at the same time. So we do hope that you find it valuable and that you understand what we want to do here at headquarters is help you increase your 504 lending activity, and we're continuing to work to improve the processes so that can be a reality for you. As a note on that, we're very interested in hearing your opinion and your need for support. So sometimes the perspective of the third-party lender is quite different than that of the CDC or those of us in Washington. So it is good. I've attended a couple of board meetings recently from various CDCs where the board members, express different perspectives and different concerns about the timing of closings and the challenges that those kinds of things present for you. If you would like to share information directly with us, we would be very interested in hearing that. So if you can reach out to linda.riley@sba.gov or any of her team here, which is Ginger Allen, Bob Accessani, and Warren Boyd, they would be happy to try to understand the dilemma, try and navigate issues, and just to take good suggestions if you have ideas on things that we can do to improve. Within reason, we're very, very happy to listen to that at all times. And Linda's sitting here shaking her head vigorously, yes. So many of you, I know, as lenders, sit on the boards of some of the CDCs, and we would certainly like to see more of the deals come through. Obviously, the economic development to you and to the CDC is of utmost importance. We did have an opportunity, Bill Manger, Linda Riley, and I, along with Jahoon Kim, to attend the NADCO Winter Board meeting last week in the god-awful place of San Diego. While everyone else was in Washington getting snowed on.
And also, too, Diana, Sherry was there for training.
That's right.
CDCs and with the board meeting.
Sherry went out early and trained you, and we just got to listen to the board meeting, so she got preference over the rest of us this time. So we did enjoy the comments. We got some good feedback on what we're doing. We had some interesting conversations with CDCs that are working with Steve and Sherry on the test of the E504 improvements, and we were very encouraged by their feedback. Several of the lenders that are on the board, were there and expressed comments and made suggestions to us. So we think it was a very productive meeting. It keeps us informed and close to the largest trade association you have that represents the CDCs and also advocates for the third-party lenders. So that said, I'm going to hop over to program news. I know that part of the conversation included in our meeting last week was what's going on with these appraisals. We know that the primary or providential federal regulators moved to $500,000 in their guidance for their federally regulated institutions last year. There was legislation promulgated for both the 504 and the 7A in December, right before we had our extended lapse in funding, and we are now have cleared the appraisal notice and are in the process of getting it ready for publication, reminding you all that it has to be 508 compliant, which is not always an easy feat, so look for it very soon. The express rule comments closed on December 18th, which of course was 2 days before the lapse in appropriations. The comments are currently being reviewed and considered. They were organized. As you all know, we received over 4,000 comments, and so it's a bit of a Herculean task to sort and resolve and go through each one of them as we're charged with doing and consider the validity of the comments and any recommendations. So that's in process. And we'll continue to move forward with that, and really beyond that, we can't say anything while we're in this review period. The 504 corporate governance proposed rule has been cleared through the agency and is at the Office of Management and Budget for review as to whether it will be considered significant or a non-significant rule change, in which case, if it's significant, we have to do some additional economic impact analysis for them. So it's eminently going to be out as well. Now that everybody's back and working through their backlog, even over at OMB, they had things that were backed up and needed to get done. The SBA 5010-6 realignment project has actually kicked off today at our Mardi Gras luncheon here in the Office of Financial Assistance, and we'll be working through that. We are taking comments, as always, through our modernization email box. And it's particularly germane now as we start to look at how to organize it and what it needs to say in what manner. So if you have any suggestions, we're happy to receive those by email. It is it 504 modernization?
Yes. 5010.
Okay. Ginger, somebody, 5010 SBA? We'll get that to you before we're done. We want to make sure that you know the email box, you have the correct email box address to submit comments or suggestions with regard to the update. I think on that happy note, am I turning it over to you, Linda?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. In the hot seat. All right, on SOP 5010-5K, which the details will follow here. We have the targeted start date, effective date of April 1, so that gives us some time to train, to get some questions back from you, to develop some frequently asked questions if we have some, and work through any understanding issues that you have and compliance issues they have before April 1st. So, anything that you see in your reading or analysis of it or in the presentations that we're going to do subsequent to my contribution, please provide the feedback, ask the questions so that everybody's ready to go April 1st. There are no significant form changes prior to that time. The new 504 escrow option will be announced when available. It is not available yet. We're working on the forms with the Office of General Counsel. Authorization updates are in process, because I know that's probably the next question now that Bea and Rhonda are back from NADCO. Will say, where is our new authorization? Where are our forms? So we're on it, guys. They're in progress, and we'll stay in touch to get them out to you as soon as possible. The systems updates, as Sherry indicated at the board meeting, and as Steve indicated earlier, with regard to the 5010 5K, will be active and live for April 1st, 2019, for the start date on that. The subpart B and C, in a nutshell, are on the slide here. I don't need to read it to you, but we have modifications to franchise, environmental, credit available elsewhere. The liquidity review increase is simply an inclusion of the change that was made 1 year ago, April, with regard to personal resources and liquidity review. Some other minor changes and clarifications on hemp-related businesses and nursing home facilities, leasing to illegal activities. The revision to the 912 submission process, we have tweaked it slightly in this update, but we are about to close in on the fully electronic upload into E-Tran and then electronic fingerprints. So we know we promised this probably 6 to 9 months ago, but we've been testing at Chandler now, making sure that the system works for you, the users, and we hope to be coming out with a notice on that that will completely take us out of the paper process for these submissions imminently. Religious eligibility worksheet and prurient material determinations, there's some additional guidance in there. One of the most significant changes in terms of input for E-Tran in this 5010 5K is that we need to know 100% of the ownership of the applicant. And that is critical to us because it helps us to determine the size of a business, the number of SBA loans that a potential individual has already been named on, is already a guarantor on, and I think the system has historically not been able to capture those without generating forms beyond it that require additional disclosures, and that's not our intention on this. Linda will go into that in her explanation. And then an update on the 4506T reconciliation. So I think, Linda, if you give me permission, I'll step back and let you have it, because this is the Linda show.
Thank you, Diane. I appreciate that. And we really are thankful for everyone on today's call. You've got a really great group of speakers that have all come together. SOPs are a big team effort agency-wide. And so when we have our discussion today, we're going to have speakers today from OFA. We're also going to have speakers from the SLPC and from the Office of General Counsel. So we hope that we'll be able to give you the overview that you need. We're always available for follow-up and questions. So before we start talking about the specific topics and drilling down, we asked Ginger to give you the heads up on upcoming events.
Thanks, Linda. So we've got a few slides here giving you the call information for OFA upcoming calls. And the one that's coming up soonest is our next 7A call. And there you have the login link there. Now, for today, we didn't want to try to cover all of the changes in SOP 5010 5K, so we're breaking it up. The next one on April 16th is intended for CDCs and LRSs, and that's where we're going to be discussing the 504 corporate governance updates in SOP 5010 5K. If you haven't already received an invite for that, just let me know, and I'll be happy to get you the information.
Right. So that's an internal call with regard to our field offices, Ginger, right, and the CDCs, and it really doesn't affect the third-party lenders. So it is strictly about the corporate governance of the CDC, not really a big draw for you lenders but very important for our CDCs and our field offices. So that's really the main driver behind that one. And then if you'd like to get an invite or get off the invite list for the 7A loan program, you can send an email directly to LaShun Johnson. And just be aware that when she sends out those calendar invitations, they're coming from SBA Connect at SBA.gov. And likewise for the 504 loan program, I'm the one that you'd send requests to be added to or taken off the list. And please send those to me directly. And I'll be sending out invitations from the 504 webinars at SBA.gov email account. Every time we send out emails, I get some folks telling me that it looked like our invitation got caught up in a spam filter. So you might want to whitelist all 4 of those addresses there to make it easier to get correspondence from us.
Right, because the truth is, this is like the Hotel California. You can ask to be added, but you can never leave, okay? We have you, we want to keep you.
So Diana had asked me to go give the overview, and we also have a couple of slides I'll jump in on, but for the most part, we thought we'd go with the subject matter experts in various areas to sort of give you the very best that we have on this update today. So the SOP 5010K, we incorporated the Federal Register notices that you previously had, the 25-year debenture, the permissible debt refinance without expansion, and then there was earlier information that was added into J on review of historic properties, but we had so many questions that we added a few clarifications in K. So we also incorporated the Federal Register notice on the increase in the dollar per job, and that was effective November 2nd, 2018. So one of the things that Paul and I wanted to make sure that you're aware of is that when you're doing your annual reports, that whereas when you're processing loans, it's effective November 2nd, 2018, and not the effective date, which is April, because that will impact how you fill out your annual report for next year. But the good news is for your borrowers that it's been effective for some time, and we just rolled that into the SOP. So now I'd like to turn it over to Babak, who's going to give us an update on credit elsewhere and liquidity.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to be talking about credit elsewhere and liquidity. Per policy notice 5017-057, CDCs must document in the credit memorandum that credit is not available from the following sources. So it would be from liquid assets from the applicants that have 20% or more ownership. This includes their spouses and their minor children. Also from conventional lenders, and the last portion would be anything other than non-federal, non-state, and non-local government sources. So if it's a federal or state or your local government, that won't count, but you would have to document it if it's from any other of those sources. In terms of liquidity, SBA has modified the requirement for liquidity review of owners to increasing this threshold from 10% to 20%. The next portion would be about project eligibility updates. We've clarified that residential facilities do not provide healthcare or medical services are not eligible. So basically, this would be examples would be like a retirement house. The hemp-related, anything regarding hemp-related questions, we're actually referring that over to our OGC team. That they'll be able to assist you with that. Leasing to any businesses engaged in illegal activity. In this section, borrower or operating company may not lease space to businesses engaged in any activity that is illegal under the federal law or the state or your local law in your community. CDCs must notify the SBA council or their district council if you see that your borrower or the operating company is actually leasing space to an illegal source. The next portion would be about borrower occupancy requirements prior to closing, and I'm going to get Nancy Capel's assistance on this one. Nancy, are you on the phone?
I am. Thank you, Babak. I appreciate being included in this. And since 504 loans are permanent takeout financing, SBA added language to an existing paragraph to confirm that a 504 borrower must occupy and operate in the project property before the 504 loan will close and fund. Circumstances that may justify allowing the 504 borrower time after closing to comply with this occupancy requirement remain in the SOP. For example, a pre-existing lease of the project property with a few months to run. In no case may the 504 borrower have more than a year to meet the occupancy requirement. The added sentence will assist the CDCs and other participating parties in the project in determining whether the 504 borrower meets SBA's occupancy requirement and the 504 loan is ready to fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. And let's just take a moment to mention that Nancy is also the lead attorney on closings for all of 504, and she's going to be doing the section on closing later in the presentation. Also, too, we're also fortunate that Eric Adams is here. He's going to be talking about the environmental updates, and Philip Milzak is here, who's going to be representing Steve O'Leary to talk about franchises. There is another person with OGC that we work with very closely, Gary Fox, who had another commitment, and he asked me if I would just mention to CDCs that when you're looking at submitting your religious eligibility worksheet or needing to get a predetermination, if a business has a prurient nature, that they've actually set up an email box for that now. So the time to send that in is before the application, and so we appreciate your assistance in that. There's nothing more frustrating than to be further down the road with the project and finding out you have an issue. So please work with us and your district council so that we can make sure we get the predeterminations made in advance.
And as Diana already mentioned at the start of this, SBA has oversight requirements that mean we have to closely monitor ownership to ensure that no entity goes over limitations to the aggregate amount of SBA portions, and, for example, that no entity has prior losses to the government. And in order to fulfill our oversight requirements, that means that we have to know who the owners are in our loans. So we've added clarifying language that makes it clear that in order to submit an application in E-Trans, applicant ownership must be 100% identified, and at a minimum, that means everybody's name is listed, and that's going to be both in the application, Form 1244, and in E-Trans. Similarly, for the IRS Form 4506T, we've added clarifying language that states that all of the applicant's financial data must be verified against the IRS Form 4506T data that they receive back, and it has to be done before we submit the closing documents to SBA counsel. Sorry my throat. So that's an important one. We want to make sure that you understand that we can't go to loan closing until that 4506T data has been received. That means you have to do them, make sure they're accurately and completely filled out and submitted right away. So back in June of 2017, when we started having all of the applications submitted via E-Trans, we allowed CDCs to make some unilateral changes up in E-Tran, and these were supposed to be for de minimis changes, like changes to principals' email addresses, phone numbers, mailing addresses, that type of thing. But we found that what was happening was that CDCs were actually making changes to ownership. So we've added the restriction in here that once the loan's been approved, all the way up through and including to 12 months post-disbursement, no CDC, including PCLP CDCs, can make any changes to ownership. So after disbursement, all you have to do is contact the appropriate commercial loan servicing center and put in a request for them. And after 12 months, that requirement goes away. After loan approval, but before disbursement, all CDCs have to put in a 327 modification action through E-Tran, and then the SLP will take a close look at that. Now, what they're looking for specifically is that the proposed changes comply with limitations on the aggregate amounts for SBA limits and that none of the parties have any prior losses to the government that are caused by the new owners. And that's it. So this is not opening up a whole other opportunity to review things. We're just looking for those two items. So PCLP, CDCs, that's all that's going to be looked for when we're dealing with that item. Form 159 update. Just a few months ago in August, we combined the SBA Form 159 for 7A with the forms for 504, and we created one form. It was a little clearer and easier to use, and the main requirement here is that if one agent performs multiple services, all of the services can be listed on a single Form 159. Now, with the effective date of the upcoming SOP, April 1st, 2019, the new requirement is that CDCs have to upload each of these forms prior to loan closing. Now, we recognize that the SOP doesn't use that verbiage, but that's the intent, and we're looking into maybe clarifying that. But again, CDCs have to upload Forms 159 prior to loan closing.
Right. So the issue there is, I think the SOP says prior to first disbursement. Within 30 days of the initial disbursement. And we understand that there are times when those interim loans are made that the full understanding of who did services or who will be performing services up until the time the loan is fully funded is not necessarily clear and complete. So the intent is by the time this package is submitted to the district council for closing and funding of the debenture, those 159s now must have been uploaded into the E-Trans system.
Right, and so there's going to be a gap between the time that CDCs uploaded the 159s with their annual reports and the time that April 1st rolls around. So for those loans that are funded during that gap time, we're giving you the option of either uploading them the next time you upload your annual report, or you can immediately go over to the new process, which is, well, you can immediately upload them into E-Trans.
So anything done now after April 1st must be put in E-Tran on a transaction-by-transaction basis. Anything that you did up until that time, we will permit in this year only for you to submit them with your annual report.
Hello, this is David Miller with the SLPC, and I've been asked to go through the next couple of slides with you. The first one has to do with insurance and the wonderful authorization. We've updated guidance a little bit to let you know that any insurance required by state law or any other insurance that would be appropriate to the transaction be included in the authorization. So just make sure that whatever you're requiring, whether that be liability insurance or any other type of insurance that's necessary, that information does make it into the authorization so that we can review it and make sure that the appropriate insurance is there and everybody is aware that it is necessary. The second topic on the next slide is the wonderful energy public policy goal. And in this one, we have changed a little bit. So on projects that need to qualify for the energy public policy goal under the heading of generation or production, the standard to meet now has been increased from 10% to 15%. So just be aware that starting April 1, when the new SOP goes into effect, that bar to reach now is at 15%. And we find that the public policy goals for energy production are used mainly for individuals and entities to obtain more than one SBA loan, which is fine, and that's addressed in the SOP. We also find that using the energy public policy goal and actually decreasing their energy use has a wonderful side effect of actually increasing their working capital.
So we look forward to processing these, and one of the things that we're accomplishing through this public policy goal is the wonderful side effect of actually increasing borrowers' working capital by decreasing their expenses by incorporating either a solar project or a wind project or geothermal, something that's going to reduce their energy, or that's going to create energy production for the project. And with that, I will turn it back to Washington. Thank you. Nancy.
And this is Nancy Capel again. The slide now is closing CDC responsibilities. This is a paragraph that appeared on page 336 of the J SOP and has now been moved to page 267 in the KSOP. It's been moved from closings to interim financing. You are familiar with it. It's only been altered very slightly to fit in a different place, and that is the construction escrow. CDC must certify that project costs are paid in full. Project proceeds were used in accordance with the please submit a 327 if things have changed, and each party contributed the required amounts. Each CDC certifies this in their Form 2101, and they must have on hand evidence of the use of proceeds and contributions of each party, the TPL, the interim lender, and the borrower. One subparagraph was dropped from this paragraph, and that is no other escrow closings are permitted because of our upcoming escrow closings with no interim lender. But that's otherwise the same. And if I can have the next slide. Thank you. We wanted to clarify use of proceeds. In other words, examples and evidence. So we have gone for purchase of land and building with a settlement state or its equivalent, a settlement statement or its equivalent, showing the amounts paid and whether paid by the borrower or from the third-party lender or interim lender's proceeds. For construction and renovation, construction contract with all change orders, evidence of each progress payment and final payment of project reflecting cumulative costs and source of payment. Again, third-party lender, interim lender, or borrower. And if a construction escrow account is used, as we discussed before, copies of paid invoices and a copy of the canceled check made payable to the borrower and the designated contractor. Copies of mechanics lien releases, if applicable in your state, for debt refinancing, a copy of the transcript of account and settlement statement. And just closing, no funds should be paid directly to the borrower unless the CDC obtains evidence of the borrower's payments. Again, canceled checks, paid invoices. Next slide, please. The CDC statement of no unremedied substantial adverse change. This has been slightly rewritten from the K to the J. Recall this: a written opinion must accompany these financial statements current within 120 calendar days from the date of loan closing. We have two dates here: 120 calendar days from the date of loan closing for financial statements, and the opinion must be within 14 business days prior to submission of the opinion to the SLPC, if that's applicable to your CDC obtained. The date of loan closing is the date by which the closing package for a loan must be submitted to SBA counsel, and that date is established by the SBA counsel. I think this reworked paragraph, although not changed in content, perhaps reads a little more clearly. Next slide, please. I have taken over for Buffy Rudisil in running the 504 review cadre. Currently, we have 9 field counsel, very experienced, who have been willing to serve on this and do the complete file reviews required for the entire country. And we have dropped the quality assurance review, which really became outmoded with streamlining 1 and 2. And if you're wondering why you got a request for a complete file review, that came from me. And we have stated in the SOP, clarified what the basis is for a CFR. It's a minimum of 1 review per 10 closing packages. And I am monthly and quarterly following the fundings for each CDC in the country to determine who gets a CFR and when. And when they are done, an opinion is issued, which goes to the center and to you, the CDC. And we worry, of course, about any deficiencies that could result in a loss to the SBA. That would be very serious. In addition, we look for discrepancies that you might want to know occurred, and also repeated mistakes. Those are always good to know. And we also have our council offering best practices to the CDC Council, and those are exactly that. They're suggestions, and we think they would be useful. Anyone with complaints or questions or problems with the complete file review process, please contact me. Thank you.
I believe I'm next. Good afternoon. My name is Eric Adams. I'm with the Office of General Counsel, and I'm going to go through the environmental updates. So let me begin by saying that SBA's environmental policies and procedures really haven't changed that much for K. We've made some minor clarifications and some minor tweaks, which we think that CDCs and lenders and third-party lenders are going to like. So let's start with the special use facilities section up on the slide. Those of you that have been involved with SBA lending for a while know that for over a decade, we've had a loan origination requirement for testing for lead in paint and drinking water for child care facilities, daycare centers, and nursery schools. And although we've had this requirement in place for some time, we still get questions to this day from our stakeholders, particularly environmental engineers, as to what testing protocols need to be followed. We've also fielded questions as to whether particular facilities needed testing. So, for example, we would get calls from CDCs along the lines of, well, small kids are only there for X number of hours per day, for X number of days per week, so does this testing for lead really need to be done in this situation? So although we're happy to keep answering these questions on a case-by-case basis, we recognize that we could speed up the loan processing times by simply clarifying in the SOP that the HUD definition of child-occupied facilities and the HUD definition for testing applied. So that should eliminate a lot of questions and speed things up, but we're still there to answer questions. For the dry cleaner section, we merely clarified that if current or historical operations at the site did, do, or likely used petroleum-based solvents, so that's PCE, TCE, or petroleum-based solvents, the general process is to go ahead and get a phase 1 followed by a phase 2. But we wanted to let CDCs and lenders know that there are situations out there where the expense of a new phase 2 might not be necessary. So, for example, if a phase 2 was previously performed on the property and is available, and no dry cleaning operations took place after the phase 2 was performed, we wanted you to know that the SBA's Environmental Committee is available to review the reports with the aim of saving the small business borrower the expense of a new phase 2. Again, these reports need to be evaluated by SBA as an exception to policy by following the guidelines set forth in the SOP. So just to recap, there's no new testing requirements for dry cleaners, no new testing requirements for the daycare facilities, child care facilities. They're just clarifications. As to gas station section requirements, those remain the same. There have been no changes to Appendix 5. Slide, please. Thank you, Ginger. In the definition section in Appendix 2, we made a slight change to the definition of record search with risk assessment. This was done because some environmental professionals thought that the SBA required that several historical sources be reviewed, regardless as to whether or not they would likely to be useful to the environmental professional. So the RSRA definition was clarified to make it clear that the environmental professional need only review as many of the standard historical resources as are necessary, reasonably ascertainable, and likely to be useful. So we think this will have the effect of reducing costs for some RSRAs that are prepared for CDCs, lenders, and lenders. And as stated on the previous slide, a new definition was added for child-occupied facilities to clarify which facilities required lead assessments, and that's the definition section. we made a very minor change to SBA's template reliance letter. We added a sentence to clarify that SBA is not requiring that environmental professionals waive state or federal statute of limitations. This was done because we had several environmental professionals reach out and say to us that they were concerned that by signing the letter, they would be exposed to unlimited open-ended liability to CDCs, lenders, and SBA if they executed the letter. And so we made this change to make it clear that they were not waiving state and federal statute of limitations. Next slide, please. Finally, we made a couple of tweaks to the NAICS code section of Appendix 4. The first change pertains to breweries. So we noticed that over the years, recently, there's been a surge in the number of microbreweries open to the United States. And the SBA has received numerous requests for exception to policy to waive the requirements of a Phase 1 when the current or prior use of the property was a brewery. So we reviewed all of these environmental reports that came in with these exception to policy requests. Usually they're transaction screens or they're RSRAs. And in every instance, we granted a waiver due to the minimal environmental risk associated with brewery operations. So for this reason, because we realized we were always granting these waivers, we have decided that current or prior brewery operations on collateral property will no longer require a Phase 2. So that should result in reduced costs and processing times, as exception to policy will no longer be required for these businesses. The next change that we made to the NAICS code was for the support activities for transportation. And you'll note that we added language after the code. This limiting language that you see in italics should have the effect of reducing the number of Phase 2s that are performed, thereby also reducing cost to borrowers. If anyone should have any questions about SBA's environmental policies and procedures, if you don't have them after this presentation today, in the future you can always reach out to your local district council or to myself or to any SBA environmental committee member, or you can also send an email to environmentalappeals@sba.gov. Again, environmentalappeals@sba.gov.
Eric?
Next, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Can you make the clarification on the Phase 1 or Phase 2 for beverage and tobacco product manufacturing?
Sure. Did you want to ask me a question, or just want me to clarify when it's required?
Eric, you mentioned that Phase 2 would no longer be required, but for a brewery, microbrewery, but was it a Phase 1?
Oh, I apologize. I misspoke. I definitely intended to say Phase 1. We never required a Phase 2 for breweries unless there was some type of issue involved in the property or a prior use of the property. So I apologize. I had intended to say Phase 1. I misspoke. So you would not need to have a Phase 1 environmental site assessment if the current or known prior use of the property was for a brewery.
Well, you found that we are paying attention.
Yes, thank you. That's good to know. I know you always do anyway. But so again, any questions, myself, any environmental committee member, your local district council, or just shoot an email to environmentalappeals, all one word with an S, at sba.gov. And next you'll be hearing from Philip Mielczek with SBA's Office of General Counsel. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Eric. Like Eric said, my name is Philip. I'm in the Office of General Counsel and a member of the franchise team. And as Linda mentioned earlier, I am channeling Steve O'Lear, who is out of the country on vacation. So over the past year, we've had the new process in place, so hopefully you're very familiar with it by now. Much of the impetus to the changes to this new SOP were due to the questions that we've received. And changes that we've made are as much clarifications of policy and the filling in of information gaps as substantive changes to policy. One of the areas where we received maybe the most questions has to do with multiple agreements. This involves most predominantly insurance agents or various dealers. You'll see a lot of dealers with multiple agreements. The adjustments we made are similar to last SOP. If there are multiple agreements, the CDC has to check the directory to make sure that all the ones that do meet the FTC definition of a franchise are on the directory. And we want to be clear that if the agreements that meet the FTC definition are not on the directory, then the application cannot proceed. The next step the CDC has to take is look at all of the agreements and determine which ones are critical. And critical is defined by the agreements that account individually or together with other agreements for more than 25% of the applicant, or not 20, I'm sorry, 50% of the applicant's revenues. And the CDC only has to follow the directory for the ones that both meet the FTC definition and are critical. I believe the previous version only said critical. We want to emphasize that they have to meet those two parts. And a new thing that we wanted to add to clarify is that if any one of those agreements, any one of those brands is ineligible, then the application, then the entire loan is not eligible. Similar concepts apply to the single non-critical agreements, which is on the next slide. Again, critical being 50% of revenues, so if it's non-critical, it's less than 50% of revenues. Like multiple agreements, the CDC has to see if it meets the FTC definition of the franchise, and if it does meet it, it's a question to ask whether it's on the directory. And again, if it is a single agreement that does not meet the FTC definition of franchise, you do not need an addendum, and you only need to follow the directory if it meets FTC and is critical. If the CDC decides it is not FTC, they still have to go through an eligibility analysis. And for both PCLPs and non-PCLPs, if the CDC determines that it's non-FTC, we as in franchise team will eventually review it. So if it's not on the directory, it's going to go through us. So we always like to tell everyone to get those agreements into us as soon as possible. As soon as you get them, send them in, because you don't want to get to closing and have not started that process, and you will get delayed, and that's not going to end up with a happy applicant. In the following slide, we have the procedure to add brands to the directory. And just like before, we prefer the franchisor to submit the franchise agreement, the FDD, and all other documents that's required to sign. But if the franchisor does not do that, we ask the CDC provide the contact name and email of the franchisor, because otherwise we're going to get to it and we need confirmation that we have all the documents and that the review is authorized, so it's just going to delay the process. So please, in that email, please contact information. Next slide talks about annual certification. You'll remember this from the previous process. If a franchise is using a negotiated addendum or no addendum, they needed to provide a SBA form 2464. With this SOP, we just want to emphasize that the CDC does not need to obtain the 2464, so do not worry about the franchisor annual certification 2464. Next slide goes into the procedure to submit franchise applications. And with these adjustments, we wanted to look at what happens when a CDC sees that the brand does not meet the FTC definition and is not on the franchise, SBA franchise directory. For non-PCLP CDCs, the CDC will have to explain how it determined that it doesn't meet FTC in the credit memo, and we'll have to submit the credit memo and all the franchise documents to the SLPC. The SLPC will then turn around and provide it to the franchise team for review. In the alternative, the CDC can always just go ahead and send all that stuff, all that information, documentation to the franchise team for review. For PCLP, they will not be going through the SLPC. They'll just have straight to the franchise team at franchise.sba.gov for that determination. So with the closing process, made a few clarifications here. And again, just want to emphasize a few things for all 504 loans. Prior to closing, the CDC must obtain all executed franchise documents, so that's the franchise agreement, the executed SBA Form 2462, if required, and any other ancillary document that the franchisee is supposed to sign. And if there's a negotiated agreement, the CDC has to get that from the franchisor. One of the things that we added to this SOP has to do with the review of FDD. We strongly recommend that the CDC review the FDD because there's a lot of great information in that, including the franchisor's financial statements. So there's no requirement to keep that in your file, but it's definitely prudent to take a look at it. For non-PCLP process is the CDC must get the executed franchise document, send it to the SLPC, get approval from the SLPC, and then with that approval, submit the closing package. For PCLPs, same sort of basic requirements, obtain all the executed franchise documents. If there's a negotiated addendum, get that from the franchisor, and again, review the FDD. The difference is that with the PCLP, they'll have to provide evidence that the franchise is on the directory to the closing counsel, and when I say closing counsel, it's the same as just a counsel. So they'll get approval from the closing counsel. We'll gather all the franchise documents, executed franchise documents, submit all of the franchise documents to the closing counsel, receive approval from the closing counsel, and only then will they be able to submit the closing package to the closing counsel for the venture funding. Next slide has to do with management agreements. The SLPC and not the SBA franchise team reviews the management agreements. The non-PCLP will submit the management agreement to the SLPC, but PCLPs will review the management agreement on their own. With this SOP, we wanted to emphasize that the PCLP CDC bears the risk of an incorrect determination on the management agreement. Management agreements are also not listed on the directory, and one of the changes in policy that we added here is that if the applicant franchisee is operating under a management agreement where the management company is either the franchisor or affiliated with the franchisor, then the applicant is not eligible. SBA has determined that when such a relationship exists, then the franchisee is not an independent small business. Lastly, franchise appeals. The first bullet you'll recognize from the last one. The second bullet, however, there are a few changes. This one says that franchise committee will refer agreements involving businesses that may be engaged in promoting religion, activities of a prurient nature, or appear to cater to one gender. Before it said we may refer, so with those business models, we will definitely refer them to the Associate Counsel for Litigation, and this is new, there's no right of appeal to the Franchise Committee because the Associate General Counsel trumps the Franchise Committee, so whatever that decision is will hold.
Thank you, Philip. So now we're going to go to answering some of the questions that we've already received in the chat box. And one of the most popular questions is, are we going to receive a copy of the slide deck? And the answer is yes. In fact, you should have already received a copy of the slide deck along with an affiliation handout and a copy of the information notice with your calendar invitation. So I've been informed that sometimes if somebody has received an invitation that's been forwarded to them, that the handouts don't always travel with that forward. So feel free to send me an email directly at ginger.allen@sba.gov if you're finding that you're not receiving handouts or if you're regularly just relying on someone to forward you the calendar invitation. I'll add you to our list and we'll get you those directly. Also, in about a week, we're going to get a recording of this call from AT&T, and I'll be sending out a link to that recording to everybody who has already received an invitation, and I'll reattach all the handouts to that email that goes out then. And again, that'll be in about a week. Somebody pointed out to us that our slides were not quite correct on the energy policy, and they were correct. The SOP does say that now it has to be more than 15%, whereas before it had been more than 10%. So our slide said at least it should be more than 15%. And Bobak, you were going to answer a question about the 1244 with room for owners?
Yes. The question, let me find the question. It was, can't find it, but it was in regards to the minority ownership or having minors. Yes, the 1244 on page 7 out of 13, there's a section on it that says if more than one person must complete this section, this page may be copied, completed, and attached to the form. So if you do have additional owners or additional people that actually need to provide their liquidity, you can actually attach page number 7, make copies of it, and attach it to the form.
We got a question asking somebody to repeat the instructions for what happens if a loan closed between the time that a CDC filed their last annual report and the time of the effective date of the new SOP. And the answer is that you have a choice. You can either hold on to the 159s and upload it with your next annual report, or you can immediately switch over to the requirements in the new SOP, which means you can just upload it to E-Tran right away. It's your choice, whatever you prefer.
So let me make that even more clear. Anyone done before April 1st, you can upload to your annual report. Any 159 collected this year through the end of the fiscal year has to be done with the loan. So you don't have a choice going forward. But historically, I think what Ginger's means is that historically you can choose to upload them all now or upload them with your annual report. But effective April 1st, every 159 has to be submitted at the time the transaction is done.
So we also have a couple of questions about car dealerships.
Sure. So the question is, any chance the auto dealers will be exempted from the franchise process? I can speak for the franchise team that right now there's no movement towards that. As far as I know in OGC and in the program office, there's also no movement there as well. These have been a little tricky. It first started with us trying to get the right contact person from the various auto manufacturers, but once we were able to get in touch with the council, we were able to make some headway on a few of them, and I know Steve O'Lear is in communication with some of the industry folks and the associations on that, so hopefully we'll be able to reach some sort of compromise or agreement with them. But for now, to answer the question, there's no movement towards that.
And Steve worked very vigorously to negotiate a palatable agreement. And we do have several auto manufacturers that are on the list already, and he continues to work with them. But he does put a lot of effort into that part of trying to get to the bottom line and some sort of agreement that would make them eligible. So stay tuned. He continues to work on getting them on the list. Okay, so we have a question that says, why does the revised SOP not address environmental requirements for concentrated animal feeding operations, and will 5010-6 address the environmental requirements for CAFOs? So as you know, we have some outstanding rule information that we have to consider as part of the rule with regard to this type of industry, number one. So we're looking at that. Number two, we are also looking at our agency policies with regard to the environmental concerns with CAFOs. And yes, we are working on putting something together. I really don't have a good date for when we will have something, but we are working on it.
So Nancy, next question's for you. And the question is, what happens if a borrower says it will be 51% owner-occupied within 12 months of closing, but then does not meet this rule? This applies to 504 and 7A loans.
That's an excellent question. I think in the first instance, if your borrower apparently has acquired a parcel, I don't want to put words in your mouth, and then they do not subsequently, there's not a short-term lease in place that prevents them from entering the premises, my question would be, why didn't they go in the day they took the deed? If the answer is there was another reason besides a short-term lease, we can certainly entertain that, but if I had a borrower who could not enter their premises the day they bought and paid for them, I would definitely run it by the center as to why the 504 loan should fund. I hope that helps, but feel free to email me.
And then we have another question along the same vein. Just to confirm, the debenture may still fund prior to the operating company occupying the project site when there are factors present like a tenant's lease to run out that need to still happen so long as it is within 1 year, correct?
That is correct. Again, if that is the situation on a particular 504, it's obviously usually going to be a clean acquisition of real estate occupied by a tenant, but to be occupied by our 504 borrower. The SOP suggestion is a few months, but in no event more than a year. I would alert your counsel and the CDC processing, the 504 processing center to this situation, and to show that you have reviewed the lease and you are certain on a date when our borrower can get into the project property.
Paul, do you have anything to add with regard to the certifications that CDC makes with regard to the issue of occupancy? Do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, just if there's a lease in place, that should be noted in the credit memo, or they should have approval from the Sacramento Loan Processing Center.
Right. So one of the things we want to make sure the CDCs understand is when you sign those certifications, you are, in fact, subject to False Statements Act, signing that this building is occupied in accordance with the authorization and the loan terms and agreements. So what we have seen from time to time is those certifications get signed before anyone is in the building. There's no construction involved. There's no tenant involved. And we want to make sure that you understand the liability of not making sure that that's a strict adherence to the rule. So the story in the credit memo, to Paul's point, and if there's any issue, please reach out to SBA, as Nancy indicated, understand what it is and determine if there's anything, extraordinary or ordinary about the request, and how we can help to facilitate an acceptable resolution.
And we got a question or a statement about the timing of when the borrower signs Form 159. And they're saying they've seen instances where a borrower signs a blank 159 before it's been completed by the CDC and the agent. Obviously, that's not what's supposed to be happening. There's a certification on the form for the borrower to sign and for everybody else as well, saying that the form is completed. So the borrower is signing that statement saying they're aware of all the forms that they're of all the fees they're being charged.
Right. And if you take a look at the 159 currently in use, it says the borrower may not sign this document until all of the information is completed. So you may not, period, have a blank form signed by a borrower for any reason, not just the 159, but for any reason. They're not to pre-sign any form that's not completed.
Then we wanted to get you the email address where you can send in suggestions for SOP 5010-6, and that is SOP-50-10modernization@sba.gov. And I'll read that again. SOP-50-10modernization@sba.gov. I'll include that email link when I do the follow-on email next week when I include a link to the recording. So the next question is about the relevance of the April 1st date. What does that mean? And the question is, whenever someone talks about submission application, et cetera, is that the actual date that a bank pushes the button in E-Tran to get the authorization number correct? So the new SOP is in effect for all applications received on or after April 1st, 2019.
Right, so you can go into the system and you can insert certain information, but when you hit submit on that loan, if it's submitted before April 1st, the rules that will apply to it are the rules prior to April 1st.
We have a question on the 100% ownership. It says, for Form 1244, did you mean credit memo here? Okay, I think we've already answered that question. Babak already answered that question there.
Want to open it up to see if anybody's raised their hand?
Yeah. Michelle, can you please open up the lines if we have any people who want to ask a verbal question?
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to enter the verbal question queue, please press #2 on your telephone keypad. You will hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please then state your name and question.
So while we're waiting for someone to raise their hand, we'll answer a couple more questions. One was, will you provide updated pages of all the changes to the SOP rather than reprinting an entire new SOP? No, unfortunately, we're not going to do that. You can use the information notice as your guide. That's where we really hit all of the important ones.
Because of highway compliance issues, we have to put the forward-facing document 100% in its 100% form, 508 compliant, which means non-sighted people. It can be read to a non-sighted person. So we have new restrictions about what we can share in terms of track changes and highlighted areas and those kinds of things, all because all 440-some pages of that document have to be readable to a non-sighted person. So it's very difficult for us to cut and paste pages because it corrupts the compliance nature of the document.
So we have another question about Form 1244 in terms of making sure we're capturing 100% of ownership here. And the question is, Section XIX in Form 1244 is only for owners of 20% or more. Are you saying we now need this filled out by minority partners? If not, where would we state their name? So yes, the 1244 and E-Tran must capture 100% of all owners. And for now, all we're requiring is that those minority owners be identified by name. But obviously, the more information you put in, the better. And as Babak already stated, you could just make copies of that page as many times as you need until you capture all the owners.
And there are currently no questions in the queue.
All right, Eric, we have one more question for you. Would a distillery for bourbon be similar to a brewery? Would it still need would it be exempt or need to submit as case by case?
Did you say a bourbonry for bourbon?
A bourbon distillery.
Wow.
Like a
that's one I wasn't expecting today. Thought maybe a whiskey question, but not a bourbon question. That's a really good question. I think that we'd have to look at that one because right off the bat, I don't know what's used in the creation of bourbon. We know with breweries, it's hops, it's things like that. We've analyzed all the materials that are used, and so we felt safe and comfortable allowing that one to go through. So I would encourage you to send an email to Environmental Appeals, it's all one word, environmental.gov. We'll take a look at that one, and we'll give you an answer. If I can have like 30 seconds more, I did see a couple of questions about child-occupied facilities, and I can answer both at once. It's kind of like a twofer, if that's all right.
Go ahead, Eric. We're starting to run a little short on time, but that was a good one.
I'll be quick. So, simple answer to the questions that came in. If your property was constructed in 1978 or thereafter, then you don't need to worry about getting testing for lead in paint or water. This only applies to either all or a portion of the property that would have been constructed prior to 1978. The other thing I want to point out is if your kids are 6 years or older in the building, you don't need to worry. This only applies to facilities where the children, all of the children there are under 6 years of age.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Did you have another question that you're going to answer?
That was it. I had two questions about child-occupied facilities, and I think my answer covered both.
Okay, great. So the next question is, why does the SOP not address the change in the appraisal requirement? We were not able to get the SOP through clearance. And we weren't able to address the appraisal requirements in order to get the SOP out into clearance. So the appraisal is still in clearance, right?
The appraisal notice is still in clearance, but we expect it to be out before the end of March.
Right. So as soon as it gets through clearance, we'll be issuing a procedural notice that will outline all of those changes.
But the bigger question on that is that is it effective as of the date of the legislative change? And yes, it is. So after December 22nd, the appraisal was changed to $500,000, but the SLPC retains the right to request an appraisal for credit purposes if they have a reason to question the valuation.
Now, Nancy, we've got one for you. And the question is, did I hear correct? Do we need to verify that a customer has taken occupancy of a property before 504 can be closed?
You heard correctly. That is now spelled out with no other language other than circumstances such as a short-term lease. I don't know how much clearer we can make it. This also goes to C of O's, which are often an issue, but I won't get off on that topic. If your borrower, 504 borrower, is acquiring property, which is presumably what the situation is, we expect that the day the TPL and the IL close with them, that they take possession. If they do not, for some reason, that should be, then we will wait until they do take possession, or you should be contacting the SLPC to get an exception and justify the circumstances as to why you want to close before they are in possession of the project property and occupying and operating. Now, occupying and operating we can talk about at length, but it's obvious that it's what the project was for.
All right, thanks, Nancy, and we're going to give our last question.
And we do have a question on the line, Ginger.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Go ahead.
Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Yes, this is Mark Spain in Honolulu. From whom do we request the PowerPoint for today's presentation, please?
Go ahead and send me an email privately at ginger.allen@sba.gov. That's GINGER.allen, ALLEN, @sba.gov, and I'll get one to you.
Mahalo for the time. Thank you so much for this very important call.
You're very welcome. Philip, you want to go ahead with the question?
Sure. So there's one question about for non-FTC defined entities that are not on the directory. What does it mean that the CDs have to determine that does not have discriminatory hiring practices? I think that gets to the question of does there have to be an eligibility analysis and determination by the CDC when they determine that it's non-FTC, not on the directory? The answer is yes. If the CDC sees that it's not on the directory, looks at the agreement, decides that it's not FTC, they still have to go and make sure that the brand or the agreement meets the eligibility requirements, looking at 110 or 120.110. So not just discriminatory hiring practices, but whether it's a passive business, whether it's multi-level marketing scheme, pyramid structure, et cetera.
Thanks, Philip. Okay, so that was a long call. I hope it was helpful to everybody. If there are more questions that you have that we didn't answer, please feel free to send it to us here at 504. Linda, do you have anything to add?
We just want to thank everyone for dialing in today and taking time to share your questions with us. There may be a few that we take offline because they would be a little complex to respond to the time we have left. So you'll get an email from us, and we look forward to hearing from you on the SOP modernization email box on things that you would like to see for 5010.
Thanks, everybody.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using AT&T Event Conferencing Enhanced. You may now disconnect